Hi there, I'm Lily and welcome to this tutorial on the GAMSAT Section 1 Fictional Essays. We have 3 lesson aims for this tutorial. So firstly, we'll start by developing an approach to answering questions on fictional essays. Then we'll revise some of the common literary genres that appear on the GAMSAT. And finally, we'll have a go at some sample questions. So how do I approach fictional essay questions? So these can be quite similar to short stories and fictional novel questions that arise in the GAMSAT. So the approach to these will be quite similar. So what we'll do is revise some of the things to look out for. We'll have a look at some literary terms and then also refresh yourself on some of the genres that these texts might fall into. So here are some things to look out for whilst looking at the fictional essays. So whilst you're reading the text, be aware of the main idea of the essay, and that is also similar to the meaning of it. So what is the purpose of this essay? Also, when it comes to the characters, always be thinking about their feelings, their attitudes, and their emotions, and how these might change throughout the piece. This is also the same for the author, so also be aware of the author's perspective. And you may also be asked about the setting. So this can be either the geographical or the time that the piece takes place. So always be thinking about the historical or social context and how this might influence the characters or the actual storyline. And you may also be asked about the genre. So revise the common genres that pieces may fit into and practice thinking about the genre whilst you're reading pieces. So for example, a genre might be mystery, romance, thriller, science fiction, or fantasy. So always be thinking about this in the back of your mind. So now it's time for a GAMSAT top tip. So make sure to become familiar with the various literary terms, and we'll refresh your memory on these in just a moment. Also, become aware of different writing styles, and the best way to do this is just to read as much as possible in your spare time. So whether it's magazines, newspapers, even articles on Facebook, all of these will consist of different writing styles, and this will also increase your reading speed, which is another thing that's important for the GAMSAT. So here's a list of literary terms that are common on the GAMSAT, so make sure you understand them. So firstly, we have an adage. So this is a proverb or a short statement that expresses a general truth. So for example, out of sight, out of mind. Next we have an allegory. So this is a story in which the characters and events have a hidden meaning, and this meaning is typically a philosophical or a political one. The archetype. So this is an original model or a type of character which has always existed and is easily recognizable. So an example of an archetype would be a mother. Next we have hamartia. So this is a tragic flaw or a character defect. So as you probably noticed, so far these are quite new terms, so definitely spend time to make sure that you fully understand what we've covered so far. Hyperbole. These are exaggerated statements or claims that are not meant to be taken literally. Irony is the expression of one's meaning by using language that normally signifies the opposite, and this is typically used for either humorous or emphatic effect. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which an object or idea is used symbolically, and this is to represent another in order to simplify or intensify a comparison. Paradox is a seemingly contradictory statement which nevertheless may actually be true, or it's a statement which seems true but is in fact contradictory. So a bit of a confusing one. Personification is the attributing of human characteristics to non-human objects. So for example, if I were to say that the sun is smiling, smiling is a human characteristic and the sun is an inanimate object. So this would be an example of personification. The protagonist is the principal character or participant in a real or literary event. So this is a type of character which may be found within the fictional essay. A simile is a specific type of metaphor, and this explicitly states the comparison by using words such as like or as. Satire is the use of humor to ridicule or criticize people or society. And finally, we have symbolism. So this is an object or an element in a literary work which is understood to represent much more than its literal meaning. Okay, so definitely have a go through these again, read them and make sure you understand them. And then always make sure to look out for these whilst you're reading text in the future. So now with all of that in mind, I think it's time to move on to some sample questions. So if you'd like to pause the video at this point and attempt question 1. And always for these passages, just like with the fictional novels and the short stories, take the time to read the entire passage first before moving on to questions. And I know it may be stressful and you'll be under time pressure, but it will definitely pay off. Okay, then resume the video when you're ready to go through the solution. So now we can go through the solution to question 1. So first of all, I'd start off by reading this entire passage. As mentioned, it'll definitely save you time in the long run. So I see that this is a fictional essay called Laugh Kookaburra by David Sedaris. So after reading this, I've got an idea in my head of what's going on in the passage, and I've also made a mental note of sort of what happens in each paragraph so that it makes it easier for me to go straight back to the text and know where I'm looking for a specific answer. So if we read question 1, what genre might this essay fall under? So as I mentioned earlier, it's a good idea just to always be thinking about the genre or type of essay it might be whilst you're reading through it. So we're given a list of typical, quite common genres. So if we go through them and see which one best fits this piece. So A is romance. So it would be hard to classify this as a romantic piece. It's to do with a vacation in Australia and then thoughts towards the end on balancing different aspects of your life. So there's no sense that there's a romance evolving within this, so we can rule out option A. B is a comedy. So I hope you agree with me, whilst reading through this, it's definitely not comedic, although parts might be included that may be counted as humorous. I wouldn't say that overall that this is a comedic piece. So we can rule out option B. C is travel. So that's definitely the sense of what I would get from this piece. So there's a mention of Paris, Melbourne, describes going into the Australian bush. So really the main focus of this piece would be considered travel. So travel is very likely. D is political. Again, there's no mention of politics or any set views on political ideas, so we can rule out option D. And therefore option C is the best answer for question 1. So here's a GAMSAT top tip. So make sure to read the entire passage before deciding on the genre. So although parts of this text may be considered comedic, it is a tiny portion of the passage and you need to select an answer that reflects the majority of the text. So now moving on to question 2. Again, if you'd like to pause the video at this point and have a go at answering question 2. So question 2 asks, which of the following statements would the woman Pat in the essay be most likely to agree with? So to answer a question like this, we definitely need to get a sense of Pat's beliefs, what she's talked about and her opinions, and then find a sentiment that's quite similar and we know that she would also believe. So Pat features very much so in this last paragraph. So she's describing the burners and how they represent your family, friends, your health and your work. And she said, in the gist of it, she said, was that in order to be successful, you had to cut off one of your burners. And in order to be really successful, you have to cut off 2. So we know that her idea of success is that you can't be successful in all areas of life, that some will have to be sacrificed in order to actually fully succeed in certain ones. So if we look for a statement that's kind of reflecting this statement. So option A, if you attempt to do all you want to do, you will burn yourself out. So that's not actually the exact meaning of this. Her meaning is that in order to actually succeed in something, you need to cut down on other areas. So it's not necessarily that you'll burn out, it's that it's impossible to fully succeed at something. So we can rule out option A. Option B, balance between all aspects of life are vital for success across all areas. So this is actually the opposite to what she's saying. She's saying that you can't balance all aspects of life for success across all areas. If you want to succeed in certain areas, you need to cut out other ones. So option B is definitely incorrect, as it completely contradicts what she says in that final paragraph. Option C, prioritizing work and financial stability over family or friends is crucial to success. So this is also not what she has said in the final paragraph. She says that in order to be successful, you have to cut off one of your burners, but she doesn't say which one. So in that sense, C is too specific and it's not exactly what she said. So we can rule out option C. And that makes option D our last option, but if we just go through it anyway, just to see why it is going to be the correct answer. So one must accept that they are unable to do all they want to do. You need to sacrifice something to succeed at what is most important to you. So that's exactly what she said. She says that you need to cut off one of your burners, or to be really successful, you have to cut off two, meaning you have to sacrifice either family, friends, health, or work in order to succeed in other areas. So therefore, option D is the correct answer to question 2. Now moving on to question 3. Again, if you'd like to pause the video at this point and have a go at answering question 3. So question 3 asks, what is the tone with which the author describes the bush? So again, tone is something you should be always thinking about in the back of your mind whilst you're reading through a passage. And again, this question is asking specifically about the attitude towards the bush. So I'm going to be focusing in on this second paragraph because this is where the bush is mentioned. And if we go to where he actually describes it, it'll give us a good understanding of it before looking at the answer options. So sometimes answer options can be helpful, but in other times they may actually kind of confuse you. So it's always good to have your own opinion first before looking at them. So the following morning, she picked us up at our hotel and drove us into what she called the bush. I expected a wasteland of dust and human bones, but it was nothing like that. When Australians say the bush, they mean the woods, the forest. So from this, I just get a sense that it's not what he was expecting. He had expected a wasteland, and in actual fact, the bush is what we would refer to as the forest. So that's all that really tells me. So option A is disdainful. So this is definitely not disdainful. He's not disappointed with what it actually means. It's just something different to what he expected. And we don't know whether he has positive or negative feelings towards this. So we can rule out option A. Option B is neutral. So this is actually quite correct in the sense that he does just state that it's not what he had expected it to be, but that it's what we would call a forest. So we really don't get a sense of whether he is happy about this, whether he's disappointed or angry. So B is quite likely. C is mocking. So although the use of inverted commas can normally be used to mock something, that's not the sense that we get in this piece. He's just saying that when they refer to the bush, it means the woods. So he's not actually mocking them in this sense. It's just what they would say, and that's the use of the inverted commas. So it's not mocking, and it's not going to be C. Option D, in wonderment. So again, although it's not what he was expecting, we don't get the sense that he's actually in wonderment. He's saying that it's the forest. So he's saying that it's actually just another name for something that we might actually have at home. So it's also not going to be D. And therefore, option B is the correct answer to question 3. So another GAMSAT top tip. So as you go through questions, if you come across words that you're unsure of, definitely take the time to look them up in a dictionary and just make a little vocab list, because some of the words can actually repeat themselves, so it's worth taking the time now to fully understand what they mean. You'll also notice that there are a lot of questions in which you're asked to define a word, so it's always better if you already know the word and you don't need to rely on the context of the text to actually help you with its meaning. Now, moving on to question 4. Again, if you'd like to pause the video and have a go at answering question 4. So question 4 asks us, which of the following statements are true about the above excerpt? So for this, if it's going to be a statement just on the passage in general, we'll definitely have needed to have read the whole piece to get a sense of what exactly is going on. So option A, the author utilizes his essay discussing Australia and what it is like as an opportunity to explore concepts such as balancing aspects of life. So this actually seems quite likely because at the beginning, he just mentions his travels in Australia and describes what he was doing and being in the bush. And then the final paragraph is definitely exploring a concept of life, and it's about balancing the different aspects and how you can achieve success in these areas. So A is a pretty good fit for this question. But if we just look to the other options to see if there's anything maybe even more suited. So option B, the author explores the traditions and customs of Australia while commenting on his lack of understanding of all aspects of the culture. So this doesn't quite fit in. He definitely isn't sure about certain aspects. So he's commenting on, say, like the homes we passed were made of wood, many with high fences around the backyards. They didn't look exactly like American houses, but I couldn't quite identify the difference. So he is sort of exploring the differences between Australia and the environment back home, but he's not exactly commenting on his lack of understanding. He's just simply sort of thinking aloud as to the differences back home. So option B isn't quite right. Option C, the author uses the essay as a platform to discuss his limited knowledge of customs and cultures around the world. So we definitely don't get the sense that this is sort of a global thing and that he's commenting that he doesn't have any knowledge on cultures around the world. He's just simply commenting on the differences between Australia and his living situation back home. So this definitely isn't the main point of this text. So we can rule out option C. Option D, the author uses his essay as an opportunity to satirically analyze the shortcomings in human existence under the pressure of modern day society. So this is kind of referring to that last paragraph where he's talking about balancing different aspects of your life, but he's not satirically analyzing them. So this would be to do with mocking. So he doesn't seem to be mocking anybody. And then it's also not really mentioning the pressures of a modern day society. So option D completely misses the point of this text. And therefore option A is the correct answer to question 4. Now, moving on to a new text. So again, if you'd like to pause the video and take the time to read this text in full before looking at the questions. And remember to always be thinking about the tone, the mood, the main idea, and the genre that this piece might fit into. Okay, so moving on to the solution for question 5. So what is the genre of this essay? So as I said, it's always good to be thinking about the genre whilst you're reading through a piece. So if we go through the options. So A is romance. So this piece is all to do with a father thinking back to his childhood where he spent holidays at a lake in Maine. And he is now, we see, bringing his own son back to where he used to go. So it's definitely not going to fit into the genre of romance. Option B, a memoir. So this is definitely a self-reflective piece in which he's reflecting onto his own childhood and is now bringing his own son. So this is definitely going to count as a memoir, but we'll look at the other options as well. C is travel. So he's not exactly going to a new place to explore, he is just revisiting a place from his past. So in that sense, a memoir is definitely a better fit than travel. So we can rule out option C. Option D is parenting. So whilst you might consider the second paragraph to be to do with parenting, this doesn't sort of take into account the whole text. And the main part of this text that we're presented with is to do with his own childhood. So for that reason, it's not going to be option D. And therefore, option B is the correct answer to question 5. Now on to question 6. Again, if you'd like to pause the video at this point and have a go at answering question 6. Question 6 asks, what is the author's opinion of the summers he spent at the lakes? So we get a sense that clearly, even from the fact that he's wanting to revisit the lake with his own son, that he must have had a good experience, because why else would he actually want to revisit? But we do get a sense of this throughout the text anyway, when he's describing the experiences he had. The vacation was a success, so he clearly viewed it quite positively. So if we look to the answer options, A, the author views the summers pessimistically. So that's exactly the opposite of what we've just said. He's clearly had a good experience. So between saying that the vacation was a success and then we returned summer after summer, always on August 1st for 1 month. So we definitely get the sense that he has quite good and positive feelings towards this lake and the summers he spent there. So we can rule out option A for certain. Option B, the author has great sadness and disappointment when recalling his summers. So again, this is similar to option A, that he viewed it pessimistically, whereas he definitely viewed it in a good light, so we can rule out option B. Option C, the author has positive memories of his summers. So that's exactly what we've been saying, and there's no way that we can say that this is incorrect. So option C is definitely very likely. So even if there is an option that explored a different aspect, you cannot say that he doesn't have positive memories of his summers. So using your process of elimination and your MCQ style, C is going to be the correct answer, because you can't have 2 correct answers. So if we look at option D anyway, the author negatively views his summers, regretting their occurrence. Again, D is very similar to A and C, so we can rule out D. So another thing to note with these MCQ style questions is that because you can't have more than one of the same answer, options A, B, and D are basically all saying the same thing, that it's negatively viewed. So there'd be no way to actually distinguish between A, B, and D. So in that way, you can kind of use process of elimination to come to answer C anyway. So yeah, option C is the correct answer to question 6. Here's another GAMSAT top tip. So always consider the views of and attitudes of the author and the characters whilst you're reading through the text. These may change throughout, but will also give you a sense of their opinion on an experience, and this is normally examined, so it's great to already have an idea of that before getting to the question. Now moving on to question 7. Again, if you'd like to pause the video and have a go at answering this question. Now question 7, what is the indication of the line, I wondered in what other ways it would be desolate? So firstly, I would go to the text and see where this line is, and then just look if there's any other context or anything else that will give me a clue as to what this is referring to. So I see it's in the second paragraph. So I was sure that the tarred road would have found it out, and I wondered in what other ways it would be desolate. So we get the sense that the tarred road would have found it out. So that to me makes it seem as though because it has a road leading to it, that maybe more people will have discovered it. So he almost is saying that he doesn't want more people to have discovered it. So option A, the author fears the lake will have changed and become a bland, urbanized place. So that is a sense of what we're getting here, because he doesn't want there to have been more people, which would give us the impression that it will become urbanized. So option A is quite likely. Option B, the author fears that the emotional connection he had with the lake as a child will be gone, and it will be devoid of positive experiences for him. So although he may have this worry, and that can be inferred that he is unsure if the lake has changed and whether his feelings will be different compared to when he was a child, it's not exactly taking into account the tarred road and why this is a part of that sentence, and then what other ways it will be desolate relative to this. So option B is less likely than option A because A is more similar to the actual text. So although option B could maybe be inferred and we could maybe assume it, it's better to go with A, which is closer to the text. So we'll rule out option B. Now option C, the author recalls the emptiness of the lake and wonders if that is the same now. So again, by reading the whole of this sentence, we know that that's not what he's referring to, and he actually wants it to be that it is still undiscovered and that it hasn't changed much. So we can rule out option C. Option D, the author fears that they will be the only ones at the lake that will be empty of all other people. So actually the sense we get from this is that he wants it to be empty and he wants it to be devoid of all other people because he's hoping that the tarred road would not have let people to discover it. So option D is also incorrect. And therefore option A is the correct answer to question 7. Now, if you'd like to move on to the final question of this tutorial, question 8. So again, pause the video and then resume it when you're ready to carry on. So question 8, which of the following statements about the author's son are most likely true? So we'll be focusing on the second paragraph as that is when the son is introduced. So I took along my son who had never had any fresh water up his nose and who had seen lily pads only from train windows. So we get the sense that he has not really been in an environment like this before. So he's definitely not been to sort of a lake or a camp as was described in the first paragraph. So that's where it's mentioned. So using this line now in our heads, we'll go to the answer options. So A, his son has only ever lived in urban areas. So this is a possibility. We're not sure. It is implied that he hasn't spent much time in the outdoors in nature. So A is possible, so we won't rule it out just yet. B, the son is young and has never seen nature. So this is incorrect, so be careful about the specific wording. We know he has seen nature, we just don't know whether he's actually been out and about in it. So he's seen lily pads from train windows. So it's not that he's never seen it, and we can rule out B. C, the son has had limited engagement with nature. So this is a much better statement because we can be confident that he has not had limited engagement with nature. We're not sure whether this is because he's only ever lived in urban areas. So option A, again, the problem is we're making too much of an assumption and inferring too much, whereas if we stick true to the text and be careful with our answering, option C is much more likely to be definite and true. So now C is going to be a better option than A, so we'll rule out option A. So option D, the son is afraid of nature. So again, there's no actual suggestion of this. We have no idea how the son is going to react to nature or whether there is a fear stemming from this. So option D is just too abstract and is too far from the text. And for these reasons, option C is the correct answer to question 8. So common trap. So although you may need to extrapolate information from a text and from a passage, try not to make assumptions that will then guide you to the incorrect answer. So always look for some actual evidence within a passage if you're picking a very specific answer. So just like in the question we just saw, we got the sense that the sun had not actually been exposed and actually delved into nature. However, we couldn't just assume this was because he lived in an urban area. So it was much better to just go with the answer, which simply stated that he hadn't had not much exposure to nature. So here are some take-home points. So make a vocab list. So always when you're going through questions, if you come across any words that are unfamiliar, take the time to look them up in a dictionary and just jot them down, because some of the words may repeat themselves and come up again, so it's worth learning them off. Also, make sure to brush up on your literary terms and genres. So practice looking out for these whilst you're reading other passages, and then always try to be thinking about what genre a piece might fit into whilst you're reading it. Even if this is a magazine or a newspaper article, just get into the habit of doing this. Then finally, read the entire passage carefully. So it's always a good idea just to pause at the beginning and read the entire text before looking at the questions, because as you've seen, you can't really get away without reading the passage in the end, so it'll actually only end up saving you time if you do this first. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and you found it helpful. Bye!